starts right now. Just a word to the YouTube viewers in the future. I'm just briefing everybody here on the summary of ethical theory. It's about what's right and wrong. There's morally impermissible, permissible, obligatory actions. We know what those words mean. And the first big ethical theory that we've all studied is the work of John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. So I'm just going to say the last few words about it. We'll keep coming back to it throughout the semester, but for the point for now, Mill is a utilitarian, which is a branch of consequentialism. Consequentialism says that the right action depends on what the consequences of the action are. So if they're good consequences in some sense to be defined, then it's a good act. And if they are bad consequences, then that would be wrong or bad. Now, which consequences matter to the utilitarian specifically? Those that bear on overall human happiness. So they say the right action is whatever action generates the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. And happiness they consider to be pleasure in the absence of pain. The reverse of happiness, in contrast, is pain in the absence of pleasure. Now, why would a person accept utilitarianism? Mill gives a few reasons. First of all, he says actions intuitively seem to be more and more right the more happiness that they promote. And actions seem to be wrong, morally, the more reverse of happiness that they promote. That's the greatest happiness principle. He also backs that up by saying that it appears that happiness or pleasure is the only thing that everyone pursues as an end and not as a means. So that means that it's the only goal, really. Everything else that we want in life is desired as a stepping stone towards the ultimate objective, which is to have happiness and pleasure. Everything you're doing, whether it's going to school, working out, finding yourself in a relationship, going to a movie, you're doing it for the sake of the happiness and pleasure that you believe that it would provide you. So if happiness is the goal of each person's action, then why not make the maximization of it the standard of ethics? We talked about how to apply the theory in a couple of trivial and not so trivial cases. And then we did talk about what are some objections to the theory. For one, some people find fault with it by saying that it is a theory fit for swine. You guys remember that, the theory for swine objection? Some people think that because they hear the word pleasure and they immediately start to imagine that this is all about animalistic, carnal pleasures for like animals. So if you're going to be a utilitarian, does this mean you're supposed to just eat, sleep, reproduce, seek out warmth like animals? Is that the right way to live? That seems like it's fit for swine, pigs, but not humans. Mill comes back and he says, wait a minute, I'm not telling you to live like a pig. I'm saying pursue all pleasures that humans are capable of enjoying. But he distinguished between the two types of pleasures. You guys remember that point, that there's two types of pleasures, lower and higher. Higher pleasures are pleasures that only humans could ever enjoy because they take higher intelligence to even understand. And then there are lower pleasures that we and the animals can all enjoy. So lower pleasures are things like, what we said, sleep, food, sex, activity. And then higher pleasures would be things that animals can't touch, like being able to enjoy a novel or a film, or studying, academic subjects, or knowing about mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, physics, art, literature, dance, even just being able to talk. So these are higher pleasures. And when he talks about those, he says this theory is not really for swine. It's for human beings because it says for us to pursue all the pleasures humans can enjoy, inclusive of the higher ones. So it's not all just about living the life of lower pleasures. And he even goes further to say that the higher pleasures have greater value, more importance, because they're unique to us. Okay, so then a couple of other objections that we touched on. One was that the theory could be seen as too demanding. Some people do think it's too demanding because if you're going to live as a utilitarian, then there might be situations where you have to set aside your preferences in order to do the thing that generates the most happiness to all. In some situations, that might not be such a big burden to bear. If you have to concede your favorite movie choice or pizza topping selection on a given occasion, no big deal. But what about the cases that I mentioned, like forced choice scenarios where you only have the opportunity to save one group of people, but one group is very large, just anonymous to you, and another group is very small, but they're dear loved ones. If it's pure utilitarianism, then you should be obligated to save the greater number of human beings because there's more happiness that can be promoted in that. But obviously that strikes, at least some people, as unintuitive, because any theory that says I'm not permitted to favor some people over others is something that can't be put into practice and is unrealistic. And one more objection to finish out the summary of the utilitarian material was that it also could be claimed that no action is absolutely forbidden in principle. Why not? Because if the action could generate more utility than not doing it, then whatever the action is, whether it's lying, stealing, even killing. It could be claimed to be the unique way to maximize utility in that scenario. And one example that helps to show us what the problem is there is the example of the transplant situation. If there were a set of people who were all dying from various organ failures, but we had access to one patient that we could take all the organs out of, but they're otherwise healthy, it wouldn't be right, would it, to kill the person against their protests in order to secure the needed organs to save a greater number of people. That strikes many people as fundamentally wrong, just on an intuitive common sense level. But the theory of utilitarianism by itself can't really easily tell us why it's wrong, because it does tend to generate more overall happiness. Okay, now, setting that aside for the moment, I'm going to bring us back up to speed on the work of Kant, and then we have a little more to develop there. Now, a whole different ethical theory is the ethical writings of this man, Immanuel Kant. Kant, the German philosopher that lived from 1724 to 1804. His theory is not consequentialist at all. It's instead based on the idea that what we should focus on ethically is not the consequences that follow from the actions, but the intentions and the will that people bring to the actions. So in general, he says that as long as you act with a good intention, then you've not done anything morally wrong, even if the action's consequences are unfavorable to all. I gave you one example where a person's trying to save someone from perhaps getting engulfed in flames in a car that they're trapped in, or not trapped in, but they're just sitting in the car unconscious, and there seems to be some damage to it. But by moving the person, let's suppose you inadvertently cause them to have a worse spinal injury, and that eliminates their ability to walk for the rest of their life. So you tried to help and you did things with the best of intentions, but your intervention made it all worse. If this was utilitarianism, they would say this is bad and wrong because the consequences are not good and they're painful. If this was just Kant, though, he would say, no, it's not immoral, because although the consequences were not great, far from it, nonetheless, you did not act with an ill will, malice, or any kind of bad intentions. The intentions were good and right, so the act was not wrong either. So I can tell you that for Kant, if the intention was good, then nothing about the consequences can change the morality of the act. On the other hand, if the intentions were bad, then even positive consequences cannot redeem it morally. Now, so we got to go further then and ask what this concept of a good will really is, because we've just said act with a good will, with good intention, and that's all that Kant requires of us. First thing I want to tell you about is, why does he prioritize the good will? And he makes that the sort of centerpiece of his moral philosophy. For Mill, it was happiness and pleasure. The promotion of that was like the core of the theory. For Kant, it's all about acting in accordance with the moral law from a good will. Why does he care so much about the good will? Well, here's one of those reasons that he tells us about. He says the good will is the only thing in the world that is unconditionally good. Okay, claimed by Kant. The good will, it's the only thing in the whole world that is unconditionally good. I'll pause for a minute to say one thing. The selection that we're reading from Kant comes from his classic work, Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals. And he wrote that in 1785. So it's a classic of Kant's philosophy, and it's his sort of masterpiece on ethics, where he breaks down what he thinks is the right definition or concept of right and wrong. So anyway, here, the good will is the only thing in the world that is unconditionally good. Why he says that is because he claims to us that other qualities that people often think of as good or desirable, other qualities or traits that people could have, are not unconditionally good. They're only good under certain conditions and not others. So let's go ahead and try and understand why. Let me put a piece of notation over here on the other side of the board. So let's try and list off, if we can, what are some other desirable qualities that a person could have aside from a good will. So what I'm asking you to think of right now are attributes or character traits that if a person had them, they would usually be like the subject of praise. It's a good thing for a person to be blank, like give an adjective that describes a person, and it's a good adjective. It's a good description. So altruistic, you say Joseph. Okay, let me put that in there. Altruistic. Sorry if I can spell it and write it. Okay. Altruistic, you say honest, Sophia, sure. Brave is another one. I like brave. I'm going to put that in there. Brave or courageous. Since this has now been taken down, I'm going to clear some room. Give me a little more room. Altruistic, brave, reliable. Okay, good. Reliable. I'm going to fish around for a few others too. Intelligent, that's great, Jose. So I didn't even have to fish around. Intelligent, being smart, it's a good quality, usually we say. Altruistic, brave, reliable, intelligent. How about a person who doesn't give up on the things they're trying to do? You know, they see it through to the conclusion, even if there's hardships or difficulties along the way. What's the word for that? Determined? Okay, that's fine. Resilient, determined. A couple of words could be used. I'll give you determined. You know, and yeah, persistent is another one. That's fair. Just being fit and strong, you know, on a physical level is usually thought of as a good thing. You know, you'd probably prefer to be strong rather than weak. So strong. How about patience? Sure, that's fine. Patience is good. Another quality that's often regarded with positive regard. How about the person that everyone likes them? They're super, you know, easily make friends. What's that kind of feature? Charming, outgoing, yeah, witty. There's many different ways to put it, but I guess we can say charming. You know, maybe if they can make you laugh, you can say humorous or whatever. Charismatic is fine. Amicable, those are all fair. Let me think. There's a few others. Okay, and so some of them he uses character traits, but he also talks about conditions that are positive to be in, whether or not they can exactly be described as character traits. So he refers to like being wealthy. You'd rather have some degree of wealth than to be in poverty. Power, you know, you'd rather have some power to accomplish the things you intend rather than to be utterly powerless. So wealth, power, being charming, altruistic, brave, reliable, intelligent, determined, strong, perseverant, patient. Make sure I'm not overlooking any of these others. Yeah, okay, and I'm gonna put one more on the board, but I'm saving for last, and that's happiness itself. You would, of course, think that being happy and having pleasure is a positive quality, and that's for Mill the major thing. That's like the center stone. But now we're talking to Kant, and here's why he says that although these qualities can be good, not one of them, none of them is unconditionally good. Okay, like so, why are they not unconditionally good? Let me try and break it down for you. I'm going to move around to certain of these examples that make the explanation easy. So let's start off with intelligence. Suppose that somebody is like really smart. You know, they're smart. They're well aware of a whole bunch of facts, and they know how to reason. So usually that could be a good thing. Certainly, it's nice to be smart. Nobody wants to be an idiot or an ignorant person. But can you think of a kind of person who, if that person had so much intelligence, you might be like a little bit kind of concerned, or you might think it's not good for that person to be so smart? What type of person? Well, Sarah, you talk about an arrogant person. Sure, that's possible. They're smart, but they are also full of themselves, and so you don't think it's so good in that case. But I was going to an even further extreme. Lauren, you're kind of getting there with cruelty. You're like a Nazi, right? Okay, good, Aaron. Like, so if you have like a sadistic serial killer, for example, there you go, and they're really like just crazy intelligent, you know, they're super intelligent, highly intelligent. Is it good for that person to have the intelligence? Not really, because intelligence makes the person more skillful and resourceful, and that means that if they have a bad intention, like they want to kill a bunch of people, an intelligent serial killer is much more dangerous and lethal than an idiotic or stupid serial killer, right? That they would just fail in their first attempt or get caught by doing something clumsy. So intelligence in the right hands can be a great thing, because if a person has a good intention and goodwill, then they'll use that intelligence for the best. But if they're evil with wicked intentions, then that intelligence simply equips them with enhanced powers to cause harm. And therefore, intelligence cannot always be said to be a good thing. It just depends which type of person has it, okay? Nazis and pizza in this class for examples. I don't know. Did I ever talk about the Nazis before? Maybe I did. I can't even remember. But yeah, Nazis are examples all the time in life, ever since the Holocaust. But anyway, you understand that intelligence, if it's in the wrong hands, can actually be an enhancement of the person's danger and harm, and therefore it's only good sometimes and not other times. And that's kind of the pattern that you're going to see as we go throughout. Suppose that somebody's really strong, physically strong. Okay, that could be a great thing. If the person has a good will, they'll use their strength for good things and not for bad things. But if this person is like a bully or an abuser, then the strength they have is wielded by a person that's not going to use it for anything good. And in that case, you kind of wish that the person who wants to beat everybody up or hurt them, that they didn't have such powerful strength, right? That's strength, but it's not strength that is morally good, okay? What if someone is really brave, meaning that they're willing to face danger in order to do the things that they think are important? Bravery can be a fine thing, if this is a firefighter, police officer, member of the military, or just a generally good person that has that bravery, then they'll be willing to face the dangerous situations that they have to face to do the things that are needed and right. But if we're talking about like a suicide bomber type person, or like a person who's got some sadistic plot to kill as many people as possible in a public place, then the bravery they have is going to make them fearless as they walk in with high-powered weapons, killing everyone. So it's not necessarily a good thing for bravery to be held if it's held by a person that's evil in the first place. And on and on and on, right? Is somebody charming? Okay, well, that means they're going to make a lot of friends and win a lot of allies. If they're a good person with goodwill, then that'll be all to the good. But if they're an evil person, like the figure of Satan from the Bible or whatever, the charisma, the wit, the charming aspect they have is simply going to make them more harmful because they'll more easily subvert people's defenses. Yeah, like a Ted Bundy figure, that's fair to say, a good example. Someone has wealth. So that means that they can use the wealth to achieve the different things that they want to do. Now, if they're a good person, the wealth will be a platform for them to do further good. If they're an evil person, right, then the wealth they have simply allows them to cause more harm because of the power that wealth involves. Power, of course, that's an easy one. Power in the wrong hands, like in a Hitler case, okay, if you want to keep talking about that, it's certainly not a good thing that that person has such power. If power is wielded and held by someone with noble and right intentions and a good will, then it's a fine thing. But of course, power in the wrong hands can also not be so good. Determined, the person won't give up. So don't you feel like if someone was going to be evil and wicked, you'd prefer to be lazy and not so, on the ball, always willing to take the next step and go the extra mile to do something wrong and bad. So the picture that you see and the sort of general claim is that any of these qualities, if it's in the behalf of the wrong person with the wrong kind of will or intent, can be something that can be used for evil. Even happiness. So I saved that one for last. Happiness, you might think, Mill thought, that's unconditionally good. Happiness is the only thing we seek out as an end. Everything else is a means to it. So how come happiness isn't something unconditionally good? Well, Kant says no, because it's interesting what he says. So suppose that someone's really evil and wicked, but they're living with the fullest happiness. If they're happy and content, then they will never have any intention to change their ways, right? Because it's like working out for them. They're pleased. So happiness can cause a person that's evil and wicked to have no desire to reconsider their ways. Also, people can become happy by doing things that are bad. Okay, imagine some kind of weird, perverted person who wants to go on the internet and look at horrifying images of people being killed or like sexual abuse or whatever, and they find that pleasing. That's causing them happiness of a kind. But is it good that they're experiencing happiness? Is that good happiness for a person to have? No. So we can't just say happiness is unconditionally good. It depends on the character of the will of the person who holds the happiness. Let me read some words from Kant, and don't take it from me. Take it from the man himself. So he says here, this is page 85 of our text. It's like the first page of his big work on ethics. So he says, nothing can possibly be conceived in the world or even outside of it, which could be called good without qualification, except a good will. Intelligence, wit, judgment, and the other talents of the mind, however they may be named, or courage, resolution, perseverance, as qualities of temperament, are undoubtedly good and desirable in many respects. But these gifts of nature may also become extremely bad and mischievous if the will, which is to make use of them, and which therefore constitutes what is called character, is not good. It is the same with gifts of fortune, power, riches, honor, even health, and the general well-being and contentment with one's condition, which is called happiness, inspire pride and often presumption if there is not a good will to correct the influence of those on the mind, and with this also to rectify the whole principle of acting and adapt it to its end. And I like this quote. He says, the sight of a being who is not adorned with a single feature of a pure and good will, enjoying unbroken prosperity, can never give pleasure to an impartial, rational spectator. Thus, a good will appears to constitute the indispensable condition even of being worthy of happiness. So happiness, when it's beheld by an evil person, like someone's happy that they just killed people or whatever, that's not good happiness. And it doesn't make anybody else feel warm and fuzzy inside to see somebody experiencing happiness when they've got an evil will and when they have an evil character. So take this point. Kant is saying to you that if you focused your life on trying to achieve these qualities in your character, you just try to become the smartest guy in the room, or the most wealthy, or the bravest person, that's not a guarantee that you're going to be a good moral person, because it has to be paired up with a good will. Otherwise, it's not necessarily positive in its moral status, right? Being the smartest person in the room doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to be morally good. Being the most powerful and strong person doesn't ensure that either. So what does? What is unconditionally good? Well, you've already heard it. It's the goodwill. So the goodwill, unlike all of these things, is good no matter what. That's what unconditional means. It's not only good sometimes, but not other times. A goodwill is always good because it's simply the intention to act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law. And that's good in all cases. What's the worst that can happen when a person has a goodwill? The worst that can happen is that their intentions don't play out in terms that they would have wanted. Like in our earlier example of trying to remove the motorist from their car and inadvertently hurting them worse, that's kind of the bad result that could happen from having a goodwill. But even if it does, nobody looks at the person's character and says, shame on you, you're evil, you're a bad person, because morally speaking, that has no effect on the moral character of their will. Okay, so now we've got to go ahead and talk more in depth about the goodwill itself, because we've been saying goodwill, 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 but we haven't yet tried to specify what it specifically means to Kant. And he does think that it's something precise. So here's what the goodwill is from Kant's view. The goodwill. It's when a person acts from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. Okay, when a person acts from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law, that's when we have the goodwill, and that's when the goodwill is demonstrated and shown. So we got to tunnel into some of these words here. What is it to act from the motive of duty? For Kant, only rational creatures can act from the motive of duty, because we are the only kind of creatures in the universe that can say, here's something that I would like to do, but I recognize that it would be wrong for me to do it, and it is contrary to my moral duty, right? So like, you could be a person who has an opportunity to cheat in your relationship, right? And maybe you're tempted by that, but you say to yourself, although I would like to do it and it might suit my interests, I recognize that it's wrong, and therefore I'm going to withhold on the action because it's inconsistent with morality. And that's just one example. Suppose that you're at a friend's house, and you could let's not say it's a friend because that makes it a little worse, but you're at some person's house and you've been invited. You don't really know them very well, but they're very rich. And you see an item that you could easily just snatch away and then sell in the black market for a ton of money, and they would never even notice it. Now, maybe you feel a temptation to do so, but you recognize that it's contrary to what's right, and therefore you don't do it. Now, animals, non-human animals, they cannot delay the gratification of an interest they have because they recognize that it would be wrong to do it. So give an animal an opportunity to eat, and it's not going to say, well, I know I'm hungry, but are there other animals that need to eat first? Let them have a go. A human being can do that. So it's a highly abstract type of behavior that humans can perform. We can say, here's something that I recognize to be in my immediate self-interest, and yet I will not do it simply because moral law says it's wrong. Now, Aaron, you say, what if you have messed up morals? Well, Aaron, I see why you're saying that, but to Kant, There's no such thing as messed up morals because there's a moral law, and it's not something that you create. It's something that is objective, and it exists before and after you've ever been born. So the moral law isn't really up to a subject individually to determine what it is. He says reason determines what the moral law is, and reason is objective. So yes, there could be people that don't recognize what's moral and immoral, but he says if we use reason, we can discover it, and that's something that we'll talk about in a minute here. But okay, goodwill. It is when a person acts from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law, something that is unique to rational beings like ourselves. Next claim from Kant. He says that the motive of duty is important because it's only when you act from the motive of duty that your action has any moral value or worth. In specific, he says that an action from the motive of duty has moral worth, but when you act from the motive of inclination, it has no moral worth. So let me write that up here, and then we'll explain it through some examples. Only an act done from the motive of duty has moral worth. And the second claim that combines with that is an act done from the motive of inclination, a different motive, has no moral worth. No moral worth. Okay, so let's think for a moment together about the word inclination. What do you think it is to have an inclination to do something, to be inclined to do it? Like, I'll use it in a sentence, and maybe you can reason from there. But you've already got it, Joseph. Good. It's a desire. It's a want. If I say to you, I have an inclination to have pizza tonight for dinner, which sounds kind of good, actually, then that just means that I want to do that. I would like to do that. That's something that's desired by me. Okay? Not necessarily as encouraged, Kais, because encouragement can come from one to another. And inclination is just first person. If I have an inclination to do something, then that means me, the first person, I would like to do it, and I want to do it. So inclinations, it's simple enough. They're just wants or desires. Okay. Now, knowing that that's the definition of what an inclination is, let's return to the statements here. He says it is only when the act is done from that motive of duty that has moral worth. But if it is done from the motive of inclination, meaning you're doing it just because you want to do it or you desire to do it for your own self-interest, then it does not have moral worth. There's an example that the author gives to illustrate this point. Example given, the shopkeeper scenario. Thank you. Okay, the shopkeeper scenario. Okay, let me walk you through this example that Kant gives to make his point here, that only when your action is done from the duty motive does it have any moral worth. Okay, so imagine this. Let's just make believe for a minute. Say there's a guy that owns a shop, and it's like the equivalent of a convenience store, like, you know, liquor store type store. And he owns and operates it, so he's working at the counter. Now, one day, a little child walks in, and the child sees an item they want to buy, like maybe a candy bar. Let me hold on while I see your comment. You say that seems kind of backwards, since the motive of duty seems more like an obligation. Like there would be no good or bad intention behind it, since the person feels obligated to do it. You know, that's a very sharp comment, and you're correct. Yes, and a motive of duty is like an obligation. You're doing it because duty requires, even though maybe you don't feel like doing it. And I'm going to come back to your comment later because I do find sympathy with it. When I was first learning Kant as an undergraduate and then later in a more advanced way as a graduate student, I kind of grappled with that. It was weird to me as well that Kant sees it as only when you feel obligated to do it does it have a moral value. But I'm going to try and make it seem plausible to you. So hold that thought and let's come back to it, and we'll circle back in a bit there, Madeline. So yes, in terms of my hypothetical, let me set the stage again. You've got a shopkeeper, they own the shop. Now, a kid walks in, young age, like we're saying 6, 7 years old, very young. But they come in and they see an item they would like to buy. Say it's a candy bar. They walk up to the counter with it. They look at the shopkeeper and they say, "Excuse me, how much is this?" Now, Put yourself in the headspace of the shopkeeper. Here's the question, and here's what he's thinking. He's like, okay, this kid's asking how much does this candy bar cost? Now, the actual retail value of it for any normal consumer, any customer would be $1. But it would be really easy if I wanted to. I could just tell him anything. I could say to him that it's like $3 or $4, and he would pay it. Just so we're all clear, why would that be so easy for him to do? To inflate the price and get more than what it costs from this kid? Why would that be so simple? The demand, well, yeah, the kid doesn't understand. It's because the kid is so young. The kid is inexperienced as a consumer, so he'll just take it as a given, whatever he hears from this adult. And so you've got the shopkeeper who's now got this temptation. He's tempted by the prospect of gouging the price. Okay, so like he's thinking in his mind, he wants to know how much it costs. It's really $1, but I could obviously give him a lot. I could raise the cost up. So what am I going to say? I'd love to have that extra money. Suppose that's the shopkeeper. He's like, I would love to have that extra money because then I could buy a couple scratcher lottery tickets or maybe get bus fare, parking fare, whatever. So I really am tempted by it. But then another thought occurs to him, and he's like, but you know what? Damn it! Takes me back to those college days when I studied ethics and Kant. And you know what? It's just not right, is it, for me to rip the kid off? So even though I really want to take his money, extra money, I know that it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be fair. So now he opens his mouth, and the kid's like, excuse me, what was the price? And he's like, yeah, sorry, I was just lost in thought there for a minute. So anyway, yeah, you asked how much it costs. It's $1, all right? It's $1. The kid's like, are you annoyed? Anyway, here's $1, thank you. And he buys it and he leaves. Okay, you understood the example? Was a fair price given? Let me ask you that. In the end. Yes, it was. Okay, now hold that and let me contrast it with a different version of the scenario. Okay, alternate ending, version 2. We have a shopkeeper again, but this is a different shopkeeper with a different frame of mind. Similar, a kid walks in, same age, sees a candy bar, walks to the counter and asks, how much is this? And now the second shopkeeper is like, well, he with no hesitation, he's like, I'll tell you exactly how much it is, my young friend. It is $1. It is $1 for you. It's $1 for me and for everybody else. And that is just fairness. Isn't that great? Isn't fairness a wonderful thing? And the kid is like, I guess. And he pays him $1 and he leaves. And now this guy who gave him the price, was his price fair, the second shopkeeper? Yes, it was also the same price as the original example, but the motives were different, okay? The case of the second shopkeeper, why did he give the fair price? It wasn't because he felt like, okay, duty calls, I just have to. He did it because he likes to. It makes him feel good. Like he gets this warm, fuzzy feeling. It's like a euphoric high for him when he gets a chance to be nice and fair to a young person. So it's not mixed at all with any contrary inclinations in the second guy's case. So we have two different sets of motives. Let me ask you, which of the two guys acted from the motive of inclination in giving the fair price? Like they just felt like they wanted to give the fair price. Was it the first or the second? It was number 2, right? And who did it just because they thought it was their obligation, even though they didn't even want to do it? It was the first. Okay, so now, according to Immanuel Kant, which of the two shopkeepers' action has moral value associated with it? Which one's action has moral credit or value? It is the first one, that's right. And now, Madeline, I remember earlier you were saying it just doesn't seem right because, and I can relate, because you might be thinking this thought, how is the first shopkeeper the one whose action has moral value? Because he's got this contrary inclination. He has to sort of like force himself against his, feelings to do the thing that he recognizes to be right. He gets no pleasure out of it. In fact, it's like annoying and bothersome to him to do the right thing, but he recognizes that it's right, so that's why he does it. And you might be thinking, well, the second shopkeeper, isn't that such a much better person? They don't have to like convince themselves against their disinclinations to do the right thing. They just are inspired and motivated to do it because they want to and it feels good. But what Kant would say is this: why should we think of someone getting moral credit, right? Moral credit, value, for something that they already desire to do? Morality, when you think about it, is something that we only really give people credit for when it was hard or difficult for them to do, not when it was easy. Okay, so like, here's another example of my own to try and make the point in a different way. Suppose you have two people, right, that are on the same very restrictive diet. Person number 1 hates being on this diet. They hate it. They hate it. They just wish they could eat more delicious foods to them than what they're on, which is like, the Tom Brady super macrobiotic, no carbs, no sugar, no fried foods, everything super green and whatever. They're eating that stuff, but they don't want to. Why are they doing it? Because they recognize an obligation to their good health to try and get healthier. So they stick with the diet for that reason. Now I'm going to take person number 2. Person number 2 is on the same diet, but they love it. They wouldn't have it any other way. They're like very, in a way elitist about their diet. And the way they look at it is, the common man and woman eating fried foods, salty stuff, sugar. Those people, that food's disgusting. You could never force me to eat that. It's gross just looking at it. But when I see like a plate of macrobiotic greens, oh my God, my mouth's watering. I love that stuff. So now, are they both on the same diet? Yes. But which of the two would you give like a pat on the back credit? Like, good on you for sticking with this diet. Which one deserves moral praise or credit? If you think about it. It is the first one because it's difficult for the first one to do it. It's not just an act of, pleasure. They're doing it because they recognize some kind of higher order obligation to their health. And so it would make no sense to go to the second one and be like, hey man, good job eating literally your favorite food. There's no moral praise that is appropriate in that case because the person's not doing it for a moral reason. They're doing it for the pursuit of pleasure. Okay? In another case, 2 people are on the same workout regimen. Let's say it's running. Every morning they both get up and run 2 miles. Person number 1 hates running 2 miles. They hate the exertion. They hate feeling tired. They hate the sweat. But they do it because they think it'll help their health. Person number 2, they're waking up in the morning. They're so chipper. They love running. It's like to them the most fun, pleasurable experience. They're saying hi to everybody, listening to the birds sing as they're running. And the same things the first person hates, the second guy loves. Now, who would you say in that case is the one that deserves some kind of moral credit for sticking on their running plan? It would be the first person who doesn't enjoy it at all, but is doing so nonetheless because they see that it's a good thing. Now, I see a question in the DMs here which says, why does the morally right thing have to be the hard option? Because it's not done on a moral basis if it's done out of pleasure. When you do something because it's fun, then you would have done it whether it was right or wrong. But when you have a contrary inclination, that shows that your pure motive was just to do it because it was right. It's not mixed together with doing it because you fear consequences if you don't do it. You're not doing it just because it pleases you to do it. When there's a disinclination to do the right thing and you do it anyway, we can say for sure that you weren't doing it for your own personal satisfaction. And that strikes us as moral because what other reason could there be? If it wasn't a moral reason and you also didn't have an interest in it, then you simply wouldn't do it. So it sort of allows us to isolate the motive, right? Instead of saying, who knows why they did it, just because it was fun versus they did it because it was right. When they didn't want to do it, we know they didn't do it because it was fun and pleasurable. And that leaves the only possibility as like a purely moral one. Anyway, let me read his words to you and you can see him talk about it. And then maybe that will help you a little bit too. Here's his discussion of the whole shopkeeper case. So on page 87, he says, I omit here all actions which are already recognized as inconsistent with duty, although they may be useful for this or that purpose. For with these, the question whether they are done from duty cannot arise at all, since they even conflict with it. So set aside actions that are inconsistent with your moral duty. Continuing, he says, I also set aside those actions which really conform to duty, but to which men have no direct inclination, performing them because they are impelled by some other inclination. Because in this case, we can readily distinguish whether the action which agrees with duty is done from duty or from a selfish view. It is much harder to make this distinction when the action accords with duty and the subject has besides a direct inclination to it. So, for example, it is always a matter of duty that a dealer should not overcharge an inexperienced purchaser. And whenever there is much commerce, the prudent tradesman does not overcharge, but keeps a fixed price for everyone, so that a child buys of him as well as any other. Men are thus honestly served, but this is not enough to make us believe that the tradesman has so acted from duty and from principles of honesty. His own advantage required it. So, like, suppose that he gives the fair price to the child, but only because he's afraid that if the word gets out that he ripped him off, then there will be like a bad Yelp review that will hurt his future revenue and business. In that case, it's not purely done for duty's sake, but it's done because of the perceived advantage that comes from doing so. And so when you're chasing an advantage or self-interest, you're not acting strictly from a moral basis, at least according to Kant's intuition here. If you want to do the things because they are the right thing, that's another question I received in the direct messages here. So sophisticated commentators of Kant have said that the answer for your question is, what would they have done counterfactually if they were not so inclined to do it, right? So if they still would have done the right thing, even if they had no inclination in favor of it, then we can say that although they had a supporting inclination, it was not the overriding factor. It was still done from duty, although there was a supporting inclination lurking in the background. But the most clear case of pure action from duty is when you are disinclined directly to do what duty requires. And let me read more. He just says, men are honestly served, but that's not enough to make us believe that they acted from duty. Their own advantage required it. It is out of the question in this case to suppose that he might besides have a direct inclination in favor of the buyers, so that as it were from love, he should give no advantage to one over another. Accordingly, in that case, the action was done neither from duty nor from direct inclination, but merely with a selfish view. Okay? So when you act from self-interest, you're not doing something just because you think it's right. You're doing it because you feel like it will make you pleased. And when you act in a way that you don't even feel like acting, but it's strictly because you know that it's moral, then we can say for sure that it's purely based on moral principles. So why did the first shopkeeper that wants to rip the kid off give him the fair price? It's simply because he recognized that that's what morality compels him to do, not because he felt like doing it. To the contrary, he didn't. In the other person's case, though he commits the same action, it's not done on a moral basis. Let me make one last point on this. Do not misunderstand. The second shopkeeper, it's not that he's doing something wrong. It's just that it has like no moral valence one way or the other. It's like amoral. It's not immoral. It just has no moral character at all. Like if I don't know, grab my favorite beverage out of the fridge and drink it, that's not got any moral character because I'm just doing it for my own self-interest. So actions which have a specifically moral character are those that are done purely on principle. And so, you know, the first shopkeeper gives the fair price just on principle alone, not because he feels good about it or because it makes him smile or anything else. So it is kind of counterintuitive and ironic that for Kant, the people who are disinclined to do the right thing are those whose actions can be awarded moral credit because they constantly have to kind of overcome their contrary inclinations, and therefore they show forth that they're motivated by the moral principles. And yeah, because if it wasn't that way, he says, and we just judge whether you're moral or not based on whether you have the inclination to do what duty requires, then there would be some people who could never have the chance to be moral because they were just born with the inclination to not do those things. And he thinks morality should be something that a rational being can choose, not something that they just have character traits and dispositions that either make them moral or immoral without them having any ability to rationally align themselves with morality. Okay. So one more big question is lurking here before we can close the books on Kant for the moment. We've said now this much. Let me go back and recap. He says that it's not about consequences or results, it's about intention. So if you act with a good intent, you've done nothing wrong, even if the consequences aren't so good. Now, what it means to act with a good will is to act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law. And when you do that, you've done nothing wrong. Now, only an act done from the motive of duty has any moral worth at all. On the other hand, an act that's done from the motive of inclination has no moral worth. Inclinations are desires or wants. So if a person does something, even if it's what morality would have required them to do anyway, like give a fair price, if it's done for the pursuit of pleasure or personal happiness, then it's not done strictly on a moral basis. So the clearest case of actions that are done from a sense of duty are those where the person is not compelled by inclination to do it, but they require themselves to do it despite that, since they recognize the moral character of the action. Now, one last thing is this. What's the moral law, though? And I'm sure some of you guys have been wondering about that. In fact, a few of you even asked questions like, where are we getting these moral laws from? Kant does believe there's a moral law, that we can act from a sense of duty to uphold. And he thinks that we can discover this moral law by the use of reason. So human reason is this amazing thing that allows us to understand chemistry, biology, astronomy, to invent technology. And so the same kind of human reason that allows us to understand the Pythagorean theorem or postulates in geometry or anything else, he thinks that can also be utilized to tap into what the moral law is. So human reason, he believes, is something that can reveal to us the objective character of the moral law. Where does human reason come from? He's kind of neutral on that. It could be that it's granted to us by God, or that it's something that is evolved over time. But humans have it wherever it has come from, and it's that can reveal to us the moral law. So when we use this reason to investigate what the moral law is, he says we will utilize a certain principle, which he calls the categorical imperative. Okay, so this is key. The categorical imperative is Kant's principle, which is supposed to reveal to us what the moral law obligates us to do and what it forbids us from doing. So the categorical imperative. This is going to unlock for us the features of the moral law. Now, the categorical imperative, there's actually two versions of it. And they sound a bit different, and they have some different features, so we have to talk about them separately. The first one is a little more technical sounding at first, and I'm going to have to break it down for you nice and slow, but not to worry, we'll get there. Just understand that on a first pass, there's going to be some jargon in there that might be a bit confusing, but I'll clarify in a moment. So here we go. Categorical imperative version 1. It says, act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Okay? I know it's a mouthful, but hold on and it will come clear. So act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Okay, so there it is. It says, act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Okay, trust me, once we understand what it's saying, it's actually not so confusing, but we got to get there. So let's learn what the word maxim refers to in Kant's usage. So a maxim, it's just an individual's policy or principle of action for an action that they commit. So it's like your individual principle of action, and it can be stated in this form. Here's the form of a maxim. So the form of a maxim is a statement that has this structure. I will do some action, and we're just labeling it X for the moment because it could be indefinitely many things. I will do X in circumstances C. And C is another placeholder for whatever the given circumstances are in the example. That's the form of a maxim. I will do X in circumstances C. Here, I'll add it to the chat as well. Sorry, just 1 second while I get that in there. Okay. Okay, I will do X in circumstances C. So for every action that a person does intentionally, meaning they do it on purpose, deliberately, there is a maxim associated with the action. And that maxim would simply be a statement of what circumstances has led the person to commit this voluntary action. Okay, so like, let's take this current example. Right now, one thing I know that you're doing on purpose, deliberately, is attending this class meeting. So let that be the action, and let's figure out the maxim behind it. So what is your policy of attendance at a class? I'll get you started in the beginning. I will go to class, and then what are the circumstances that that lead you to come to class? I'm not talking about the school's policy or the professors, but you, the student. You'll come to class to earn a degree. You'll come to class to learn. That's another circumstance given there. And surely those are true, yes. But I was going to put it maybe even more minimally. That's very noble and upstanding. Joseph, you say, I will go to class in the circumstance of hoping to pass the class. You say, because you paid for it. I like that also, Sarah. To get a good grade, sure. More fundamentally, though, like you're in the class right now because this is the scheduled time. You know, this is a scheduled time for class. And so I'm sure for some of you anyway, the maxim is simple enough. Like, I will go to class when class is in session. Maybe I'll add one little proviso. I will come to class when I am able to and it is in session. And I think that's probably a fair description of most of your own maxims right now. Like, why are you here? Because you know it's 5:30 to 6:45, and you're not, physically incapable of attending the meeting. So maxim is what you will do and in what circumstances. Now, the categorical imperative asks us this. It asks us to contemplate what would be the case if this maxim was to be converted into a universal law. Okay, so like elevated to the level of a universal law. And the universal law has this form. Okay, let me go and write it here. UL for universal law. It's just the same but transformed into an all statement. So it would say all people will do X in the same circumstances as me, in circumstances C. All people will do X in circumstances C. So if your attendance tonight was based on the maxim that I will come to class under the circumstances that I am able to, and it is class time, then that elevated to a universal law would say what? That all people will do what? Will go to class when they are able to be there and when it is in session. Now, if that was a universal law, there would be no problem with that. All that it would mean is that people are going to their duly scheduled classes when they're able to be there. And so that would not involve any contradictions nor any undesirable outcomes. So that one passes the bar of the categorical imperative, and therefore it's moral and it's not wrong. So congratulations, you've done nothing wrong by being here today, at least according to the maxim I've worked with. But the more interesting thing is to consider actions that fail this test, okay? So that's what I really want to focus on with you guys now. Because many actions are ruled out by the moral law as being immoral if they could not be made into a universal law. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some of them. Here's one. Suppose, this is Kant's own example, so after I speak with you about it, I'll read some from his words. Suppose there's a person who wants some extra money. They're a little low on cash, right? And they would love to have 20 bucks. They know they have a friend that has the 20 bucks, but they also know this, that they will never give that money to them unless they promise to what? Think you finished my thought here? You want to get the money from the friend or whoever it is, but they'll never give it to you unless you promise to pay it back, right? So suppose then this person has this intent. I'm going to promise to pay it back, so they'll give it to me in the first place, but I'm never going to pay it back, and I have no desire to do that. So what they're saying they'll do is lie about their desire to repay in order to get the loan, in order to get the money. So what's the maxim? I will lie about repaying a loan in what circumstance? What's the circumstance here? Nothing too, amazing or special, but the circumstance is simply that the person what? I will lie about repaying a loan when, fill in the blank, when I want to get money. Yeah, when I just want extra money. Okay, good. Now, if that was a universal law, who would lie when they promised to repay loans that they requested? If it was a universal law, simply stated, then it would be that who does this same thing? Everyone. Okay, good. Now, let's focus. If everybody, 100% of the time, not just sometimes, not just most of the time, but if in 100% of cases, borrowers lied to the lender about repaying, then would the loans even be given anymore? No. Why not? Because if that was the situation, then the lenders would know that 100% of borrowers are lying, and therefore they would never generate the loans because they would know that this is the universal rule. So if this person acts on that maxim, it's bad and wrong because they know it cannot be turned into a universal law without being a contradiction. In fact, if all people lied about repaying loans, then there wouldn't even be a lending system and the lending system would collapse and break down. So what Kant is saying is all you got to do is think about it rationally. And to bring this down to more simple with stating things, all it says is ask yourself before you act, what would it be like if everybody in my circumstances did the same exact thing? And if that would be impossible or undesirable for everyone to do the same, then you shouldn't be doing it either because it could not be made into a universal law. And that's the key indication that it's wrong and it's immoral. Okay, so let's go into some other cases. You want to ride the subway, but you don't want to pay the fare. So what's the maxim in that case? I will ride the I will take a free ride on the subway when I want to ride on the subway. Okay, or let me say maybe differently, I will not pay for my subway fare when I ride on the subway. Now, if that was a universal law, um, who would be skipping the payment on the fare? If this individual's action became a universal law, then nobody would pay, or I could say everyone would not pay. And if that was the case, then what would even happen to the subway system? If 100% of passengers were just not paying, then what would happen? It would shut down. It wouldn't exist. It would not have funding, and so it couldn't operate. And then there wouldn't be a subway system for the free rider to ride for free on. So think about it like this. Does the free rider want everybody to do what they're doing? Do they really want that? No, because of course it would destroy the resource that they're gaining access to. So they themselves know they could not want everyone to do what they're doing. In the same way, in our previous example, the delinquent borrower does not want every single borrower to do the same thing, because if so, their action could not possibly meet with success because they wouldn't receive the loan in a world where everyone was delinquent on their repayment. So what Kant says is reason, your God-given or whatever naturally evolved reason is telling you something. When you contemplate an action that could not be put into practice by all, it's wrong for you to do it too, and you know that because you don't even want everyone to do it, okay? The free rider doesn't want everyone to do what they're doing. They just want themselves to do it, like an exception to the rule, and for everybody else to pay into the system so that their deviation from the rule can be exploited by the people that are paying. The person that won't repay their loan, same. They don't want 100% of people to do the same thing. They want enough people to pay those loans back, so there will be a presumption of honesty when they request their loan. And that presumption would not exist in case systematically everybody lied about repayment. Let's see, another one. I can give you a few more just because it's good to go with as many examples as possible. Say there's a long line. If you're a person like me or just any of us, some of us, you get a little impatient when you're waiting in a long line. But you know what? There's other people, so you got to wait. Nonetheless, suppose someone's that impatient and they say to themselves, I'm just going to try to get ahead in the line by doing what? What could that be? Maybe you know. Tell me what you think I'm suggesting. Cutting in line. Okay. So what's the maxim of the cutter? I will cut in line when there's a long line. Okay. Now, if that was the universal law, then who would be cutting in the line? Everybody. And so would that even be possible? No, because there wouldn't even be a line anymore. There would just be like a melee of people mobbed, clustered up close to the entrance of whatever the thing is. Furthermore, the person that cuts, do they want everybody to cut as well as them? No, because what would be the point anymore? If everybody cutted, then when the cutter cuts, what would happen to their position in the line? If everybody cuts, then once they cut, someone will cut them and they would gain no advantage. So cutting only really works if you cut, but everybody else respects their position in the line so that you can advance in the line while they stay in place. So the cutter, he or she, does not want everyone to act the way they're acting. And once again, that's reason telling you something. It's telling you that if this can't be done by everybody, it's a wrong action and you shouldn't do it either. So here, let me read a little bit of Kant, and you'll hear him say this. So, let's take a moment to find it. All right. A man finds himself forced by necessity to borrow money. He knows that he will not be able to repay it, but he sees also that nothing would be lent to him unless he promises to repay it in a definite time. He desires to make the promise, but he still has enough conscience to ask himself, is it not wrong and inconsistent with duty to get out of difficulty in this way? Suppose, however, that he does do so. Then the maxim of his action would be expressed thus: when I think myself in want of money, I will borrow money and promise to repay it, although I will never do so. Now, this principle of self-love or of one's own advantage may perhaps be consistent with my whole future welfare, but the question now is it right? I change then the suggestion of self-love into a universal law and state the question thus: how would it be if my maxim were a universal law? Then I see at once that it could never hold as a universal law of nature, but would necessarily contradict itself. Because supposing it to be a universal law, that everyone, when he thinks himself in a difficulty, should be able to promise whatever he pleases with the purpose of not keeping his promise, the promise itself would become impossible, as well as the goal that one might have in view of it, since no one would consider that anything was promised to him, but would ridicule all such statements as obvious lies. So that's his presentation of the false promise of repayment example. It's based on a bad maxim. It's a bad maxim because it cannot be transferred into a universal law without contradiction, or at least without the person themselves not wanting that. Okay? So any case where a person is going to do something that they recognize could not be done by all, or they would not want to be done by all, that's a wrong action for them to do. So in Kant's categorical imperative version 1, you're supposed to think through your actions before you commit them and contemplate what it would be like if everybody acted according to your principle. And if that would create a world that either couldn't exist or you wouldn't want to exist, then that's a wrong action for you to do too. So a way of making it a little simpler is this. Kant's version 1 of the categorical imperative basically says it's only morally permitted to do actions that that who could do, that would be possible for who to do. It's okay to do it, but only if it's possible for who to do it? Everyone, right. It has to be possible for everyone, Robert, for everyone to do it without any kind of contradiction. So yeah. So if it was just you doing it, and that's all you're considering, that's not enough. You have to ask yourself, imagine, what if everybody acted this way? And if that would be impossible to put into practice or undesirable to put into practice, it is a wrong action and you shouldn't do it. Okay, so like, say I wanted to cheat on a test on the bar exam as a lawyer, right? Somehow I've got the answers or whatever, and I'm going to cheat to get the legal certification. My maxim then is like, I will cheat on the bar exam when I want to get, my law degree. Now, if that was a universal law, it would be that all people who take the bar exam will cheat to get their law degree. But if that was the case, the legal profession would cease to exist because we wouldn't have any qualified lawyers and they couldn't do their job in court. And of course, that would be contradictory to the whole stated aims and goal of having a legal profession. Or a person cheats on their medical exam to become a medical doctor. If everybody did the same thing, then we would have 100% unqualified doctors and the whole field itself would cease to be profitable. It would cease to be reliable and everything else. So when you cheat on one exam, you might be thinking like, okay, well, this is just me cheating and it's okay because it doesn't really affect anybody else. It doesn't harm the world. But Kant wants you to think in hypothetical terms about what if everybody did act in the same way? And inside what actions could not possibly be done by all or that you would not want to have done by all. Okay, so that's the way to think about this first version of the categorical imperative. You should act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law. The moral law is revealed by the categorical imperative, and in its first presentation, it's telling us that. So hopefully that makes a little clearer some of the confusing jargon that the author uses when he talks about maxims and being able to will them as a universal law. Now there is a second version of the categorical imperative too. And I saved it for a second and last because it's much easier actually than the first one. The first one about maxims and universal laws, it's a little more complex. The second version is a little more straightforward. So let me explain it. Categorical imperative version 2. Okay, so in version 2, he just says this: never treat a human being as a means to an end, but always as an end in itself. Okay, so never treat a human being as a means to an end, always treat a human being as an end in itself. Now, this will bring back our earlier discussion of the term end and means. So let me see if we can recall that. What is an end again? Ends. It was discussed by Mill when he talked about how the happiness is the only end that we all seek, and everything else is a means to it. So what's an end? It's a goal. That's right. It's a goal. It's an objective or a desired outcome. Perfect. So what are means then? One more time. Means in combination with ends are the what? The means towards the end are the
way that we do these to get those goals.
Yes, good, Aaron. That's right. And also to the others. The actions that you take the methods that you use to achieve whatever the goals or ends are. Okay, so now with that in mind, this says when you're dealing with other human beings, another member of Team Humanity, one of us, okay, a human like you're supposed to show that human being respect. And the way you do that is never to treat them as though they were just a tool to be used or exploited in order to arrive at some goal that you have. You're not supposed to use people to achieve your goals. You're supposed to treat people like they are the goal for the sake of which you're acting. Okay, so remember the transplant scenario? Yeah? In the transplant scenario, utilitarians had trouble because it was like, well, if we kill one innocent person, give their organs to 5, that's more total survivors than if we decline to kill the one and just allow the 5 to die of natural causes. Now we have 5 dead, 1 living. Wouldn't it be better in terms of more happiness overall for the greater number to survive? But for Kant now, yes, good, Sarah. It's wrong to do that in Kant's ethical system. And why? Because it would use the one innocent victim as a means to what end? That person's body parts and organs literally are being used as a means to what goal in that case? Just, it's easy to say, just let me know. Making sure it's clear. To help the 4, to save their lives, right? So that person is used literally as like a source of spare parts for the survival and safety of 4 others. But a human being is not ever supposed to be used as a means. Human beings are more special than that. We're not just objects, we're subjects. So we're not supposed to be used as things to achieve whatever goals others may have that we don't have in common with them. Okay, so like if there was some kind of crazy mass shooting happening, God forbid, hope that never happens to any of us, but if it did, and suppose that everyone was running and trying to scatter and go run off to safety, imagine that someone even bigger and stronger than you tried to grab you and hold you in front of them as a human shield. Like, oh no, I'm scared, I need to use this to block something. That would be wrong, wouldn't it? That would be wrong. Because, well, rude, putting it lightly, sure, Sarah, but yeah, it would be deeply wrong and offensive because that would be treating you as a means to the end of their survival. But of course, you're a human being. You're not a table or a chair, so you shouldn't be used as a means. Now, if you literally do have a table like this, and you prop that up in front of you, that's fair. That's fair game because the table doesn't have a consciousness. It doesn't have a will. It doesn't have the ability to judge morality like we do. So human beings are unique and special, and they should never be treated as tools to manipulate in order to achieve whatever goals you have. So like, I don't know, suppose that you have a neighbor and you're stealing their packages and you know they don't know about it, but you've got all this cool stuff in your house. You're using them and their wealth as a means to your goal of attaining that property. And you're bypassing their permission or consent. So they've just become like an, I don't know, an ATM for you to withdraw from. Or if you steal money from someone, you rob them, right? Take money out of their wallet. You're using them as a means to the end of your financial enhancement or gain. So we should not use people as means. Treat people instead as though they're the goal themselves for the sake of which you're acting. Now you might be wondering, when and in what cases do I use someone as a means? There's one way that it's been put by a modern commentator of Kant, a modern Kantian, that's Honora O'Neill. And the way she puts it, I think, is very helpful. So I'm going to write it over here really quick. So when we use someone as a means, you use someone as a means when you involve them in an interaction that they would not consent to. Would not consent to. So you use someone as a means when you involve them in an interaction they would not consent to. So like in the human shield example, obviously this person didn't get permission. Like, yo, you need help? Just use me as a shield. In the transplant scenario, the victim isn't giving permission to being used in that way. I don't know, take another really gross example, like rape, okay? In the case of rape, someone is definitely using the human as a means towards the attainment of the perverse sexual pleasure of the act. And of course, by definition, this is not consented to either. In the earlier example, where you borrow money with no intention to repay, but you lie about that, you're not giving a person a chance to consent to what you're really doing because you conceal from them your true motive, which is to get the money without ever repaying it back. But it's not utilitarianism though, Sarah. I see your comment there. Because in utilitarian views, You should just do what generates the most overall happiness. For Kant, though, living according to the moral law might not make anybody happy. Okay, like what if you could steal from the rich and give to the poor and generate a lot more human happiness by doing that? It would still be wrong, says Kant, because that's treating the wealthy person as a means towards the social engineering of greater happiness for more people. So they're quite different still. It's not based on the promotion of human happiness, but living within the boundaries of the moral law, which may or may not make anybody happy. But in general, a lot of times it will. I'm not saying that acting in accordance with the moral law makes people unhappy, but it's not a necessary condition that it do for it to be an obligation, right? So like, say if I told you the truth instead of lying, but lying would have made you much happier. Well, I still ought to tell you the truth, even though it's going to make you miserable in Kant's view, because the goal for Kant is not to create maximum happiness. It's to simply never treat humans as a means and to do actions that could be done universally without contradiction. And you say, I mean what I was saying a few lessons back about only going for happiness with the consent of others. Right, now I understand. Yeah, so the problem with utilitarianism that you found fault with was exactly sort of this thing, that you don't obtain consent of others when you go out for the happiness that you're seeking, correct? Now, let me say one last thing before I let you guys go. If you do obtain consent from the person to be serviceable towards your goal, then they have not been used as a means, because then they make your goal theirs as well. So if I steal someone's study notes and then I turn it in as my paper and I get an A, that's clearly using them as a means. They've lost their work and now I'm benefiting from it and they haven't consented to do it. But if I ask this person, can you help me study? And they say, sure, you know what, I'm willing to do that. Then they can achieve the same result, but no one's been violated and it's not a violation of the moral law because they have chosen to make themselves a part of your goal. So don't think that Kant is saying we can never be helpful to each other without violating morality. The key ingredient is consent. So if I go to the barista at Starbucks and I order a drink and they serve me the drink, I haven't used them as a means, even though I'm getting something out of them, the service and the product, because we all consent to our role in the interaction. They haven't been forced to work as a barista. They're doing so at will. And if they don't want to anymore, they can quit at any time. And so I'm not placing any burdens or demands on them that they don't consent to. And notice that we both are served mutually because their income is generated by the customers that come in and pay for the drinks. And my desire to exchange some of my money for a good or service is in line with my own interests. So both sides are mutually benefiting. They get pay, I get a service, but neither one's being exploited. On the other hand, don't consent to helping people cheat, though, because that's wrong for other reasons, since cheating itself can't be made into a universal law. I was going to say this last thing. Suppose it was a slave, though, like we had a system of slavery, as unfortunately many countries, including ours, had in the past. If it's the slave that's being forced into labor without any ability to say, I don't want to do it, then the benefits derived from the labor of the slave are done by treating them as a means to the end of the economic output. And that bypasses their will, and it doesn't treat them as though they are ends in themselves. So that's what I had for you guys today. I noticed that it took us the full meeting to really dig into the Kant, but it's important for us to take our time on it because these two big ethical theories are kind of stage setting for the remainder of the semester. Not to worry, though, we're not going to fall behind because there's some of these essays that come later that are a little shorter that I can probably condense into two of them into a single lecture, especially when we return to face-to-face next week, because everything seems to go a lot faster when there's face-to-face classroom interaction. So we will just push the discussion of Mary Ann Warren to the Monday meeting. I'd like you guys to make sure to read that. It's the next item in the list of readings. And then we'll be talking about abortion for a few weeks because that's the first essay on that topic. So anyway, guys, I'm going to let you go, but I'd love it if you'd say goodbye or whatever you'd like so that I feel like we've got the same, we're on the same page here. Okay. Thanks so much then. Have a great one, everybody.
Hi, Professor.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Okay,
you,
I'll see you
Professor. Have a
soon.
good night.
Okay, be well. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, signing out, YouTube, guys. I'll see you soon.